Hey guys, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. And today we are going to be venturing to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and talking about just some brief history of the park, how it came to be, and then of course we will be discussing various disappearances and mysteries surrounding the park. So the park is located in Tennessee. It is right on the border of Tennessee and North Carolina. And actually, of the 59 national parks, it gets the most visitors, roughly 12 million visitors a year. And it has over 522,000 acres, which is roughly divided in half between North Carolina and Tennessee. There's over 850 miles of hiking trails and over 2,900 miles of streams and all kinds of wildlife and flora and fauna. It's called the Great Smoky Mountains because, it gets the smoky term obviously because there's a lot of fog and low-lying clouds. So, from a distance it looks foggy or smoky. It's actually the only national park to be partially federally funded. More than $4 million was contributed by the states of Tennessee and North Carolina. Then another $1 million was raised by just individuals, private groups, even children who apparently gave their school change. And the remaining $5 million needed to purchase the land was donated by the Laura Spillman Rockefeller Memorial Fund. For thousands of years, the region was occupied by various Native American tribes, mainly the Cherokee, who had their homes there and occupied numerous towns around the valleys on both sides of the Appalachian Mountains. And their first encounters actually with whites, Europeans, were as traders, mostly coming over from places like Virginia and South Carolina. And basically more and more white settlers and entrepreneurs kept arriving, developing logging as one of the major industries. And unfortunately, after the Little River Railroad was constructed in the late 19th century, this just became like it was destroying the natural beauty of the area. And by the 20th century, visitors and locals banded together to try and raise money for the preservation of the land. In 1923, Mrs. Anna Davis, who actually later became the first female state representative in Tennessee in 1924, well, in 1923 she was traveling around to various national parks in the West, and she returned home to the Tennessee area and wondered why there was no park there. And she is credited with having the idea to create a national park and later introduce the bill that would establish the park. In 1931, both North Carolina and Tennessee presented deeds which ultimately transferred 300,000 acres of land to the government. And it was at that point that Congress was finally able to progress with moving forward to creating the facilities of the national park. And then the park was officially chartered by Congress in 1934, and then in 1940 was dedicated by FDR. Some other interesting facts: it is the salamander capital of the world, with more than 30 different species of salamander in the park, making them the biggest group of amphibians. And apparently one of the best places to go and see the salamanders is by Grotto Falls, which apparently a bunch of them, you can see a bunch of different ones that just happen to hang out there. Also, there are 19 different species of fireflies in the park, which I think is so cool. There's this time of the year, each year, that the park holds an event where the visitors have a chance to see when the fireflies, they have this synchronicity and they all light up at the same time. And it's just one of this 19 species, but apparently it's just an amazing sight. Apparently it's such a popular thing that there's only a lottery system to go and see it because so many people want to see it. And I would love to see something like this. I love fireflies. I've loved them since I was a kid, so this is definitely something I would like to check out. And the fog that we see that constantly surrounds the Smoky Mountains, it comes from the rain and the area's vegetation. The Smoky Mountains get a high amount of rainfall, which results in dense fog. Also, the trees, bushes, and plants in the area all give off vapor that creates this fog. Plants exhale volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which are chemicals that have high vapor pressure and can cause fog. So it's like apparently all these things coming together that's in this one area, which is why in the Smoky Mountains we get that constant fog and smoky type appearance, which I thought was really cool. Alright, so now I want to get into some of the disappearances and mysteries that have happened in the Great Smoky Mountains. And I just want to let you guys know, I'm not going to be talking about, some of the really well-known cases like Dennis Martin, and just because they've been done so many times, and I know some people just say like, oh, it's a 411 case, so I'm just going to focus on other cases, mainly ones that have happened more recently or in the last couple decades, and possibly ones that you may not be familiar with. The first one I want to talk about is Susan Clements, and she went missing in September of 2018, September 25th of 2018 to be exact. On September 25th of 2018, Susan and her 20-year-old daughter had parked at Clingman's Dome and hiked Andrews Bald, which is a moderate outback trek. It's about 3.6 miles round trip on the Forney Ridge Trail. On the return hike from Andrews Bald, Susan had decided she did not want to hike up to the popular Clingman's Dome observation tower. She was last seen at 5:30 p.m. around a quarter mile from Andrews Bald, where she had told her daughter that she was going to run ahead to the tower. The two had planned to meet back in the parking lot. Unfortunately, Susan never arrived back, and as it got darker, her daughter reported her missing, and crews went out almost immediately, starting to search. They searched all over the Forney Ridge Trail, also up the adjoining Appalachian Trail. Nobody saw her. The weather, of course, was getting worse and worse, but that didn't stop search efforts. Search efforts lasted over a week and involved 175 trained personnel from 5 different states and some 50 organizations, various helicopters, drones, special dogs. After several days of searching, they did find Clements' poncho, which was located south of the Appalachian Trail, so searchers then went further down that area of the Huggins Creek drainage, which when they did that, they found more of her clothing. And then unfortunately, on October 2nd of 2018, they did find her deceased. She was lying on her back in one of the creeks, the Huggins Creek. The area is said to be very steep and very dense. She was airlifted out by the National Guard. And apparently what happened in this case was Clements had missed the turn to Clingman's Dome parking area from the Forney Ridge Trail, so she kept going, which put her on the Appalachian Trail. And unfortunately, due to the weather, it got below 40 degrees and it was wet and cold, and she only had this little poncho. And after they did the autopsy, it was determined that she had died of hypothermia. And I just wanted to start with this case because when this case first happened, there was all the speculation of foul play. Even after they found her body, there was no trauma to their body and once they did the autopsy, it was determined that she had died of hypothermia and dehydration, which made sense due to the circumstances and what she was wearing. According to the medical examiner's report, they stated that her clothing was not sufficient for the weather there, but obviously this woman was not planning on being out in the elements overnight. But she wasn't carrying a pack or any food or extra water, and no means of shelter as well. And they're not sure why she missed the turn to Clingman's Dome. There's countless reasons what could have happened, and it's better not to speculate, and that's what the ranger said as well. But it goes to show you that even when you're a very experienced hiker, one simple mistake like this can lead to tragedy. And that's why I think it's very important to have backup plans, have a Garmin device, and in this case, she did a lot of things right. Mostly everything right. I don't know if she had a Garmin device, if it would have saved her, who knows? But a satellite device always does definitely increase your odds of being saved. And I also wanted to mention that she was found only about 2 miles from the parking lot, which just goes to show you how easy it is to get lost. And even if you are in one of these areas, they're so dense and so thick that even when searchers are searching for you, it can be very difficult to find you. So it's always important to do everything you can to increase your chances of survival. If you do get lost, carry an emergency blanket, a whistle, things like that. And I'm not saying she did anything wrong. This is obviously a terrible tragedy, and I can't imagine what her family is going through or went through, and I just pray that they can move on and find closure. This next case is definitely very bizarre. In the month of March of 2012, Liu King, who was 24 years old at the time, he didn't show up for work, and he wasn't answering his cell phone, answering any text. So it wasn't until his work tried calling his parents and him that they figured out something was going on. Well, they then backtraced him to the Microtel Inn and Suites in Cherokee, North Carolina, which is located right next to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And fortunately, there was actually video surveillance provided by the hotel on March 17th, which proved that he actually was there. It also showed that he had a backpack with him, and the footage is actually the last reported sighting of Derek. So once his family saw this, they immediately went down and eventually found his car in the parking lot at the Newfound Gap. Well, they contacted authorities and they searched the car, and they found all this survival gear, like a map, a knife, sharpener, a tent, a sleeping bag, all this survival food, a fire starter rod, flashlight. They also located pages from some kind of military manual, his wallet, which had tons of cash in it. So it obviously looked like he was preparing for a vacation in the wilderness, and I guess he had like a fascination with that survivalist Bear Grylls. And the odd thing about this was that he had all this gear with him and he didn't take any of it with him. And there was another strange clue that apparently he left a note that said, "Don't try and follow me." Now, of course, the authorities and his parents weren't going to, follow the note. They obviously attempted to follow him, and they put together this massive search party with rangers. They interviewed all the campers and hikers in the area. I mean, it was a huge undertaking, asking everyone if they had seen Derek, but from all this, nothing came about. Well, the next day had been a sunny and clear Saturday, and the area was full of people, and it was just odd that no one had seen him. So this led to the authorities thinking that maybe he had gone off trail and gotten lost, which, again, for a guy that seemed to be obsessed with like outdoor survival and wilderness training, why wouldn't he have taken all his gear with him, and why would he have just wandered off and somehow got himself lost? Well, nobody could figure out why he would have gone or done this too. I mean, they were just as baffled. The search continued for weeks, but eventually they were forced to give up, and the family said they believed that since his favorite show was Man vs. Wild with this guy Bear Grylls, who liked to go out in the wild with minimal supplies and try and survive, they theorized that maybe Derek had decided to emulate his hero and go out and survive by himself. But it's also curious, like, well, if that was the case, why didn't he take any of his supplies? Why? And his family suggested that maybe he wanted to create an even more difficult situation for himself. After more time went on, another popular theory was that Derek might have decided to end his own life. The family said that the day that he disappeared was actually the anniversary of his grandfather's death, whom he was very close to, and he might have chosen to go out on that day and end his life. But that's also sort of a confusing idea because of the vast amount of supplies that he actually bought and left with him in his car. What would be the point of buying all those supplies if you were just going to go out and, kill yourself? Another thought is that he decided to scale the trail that he was going to take, or scout the trail that he was going to take, was intending to come back for his gear, but something happened to him on that scouting trip. Maybe he was attacked by an animal, maybe he was kidnapped, but he remains missing to this day, and there's no evidence, there's been no sign of him. I'll have information in the description on the phone number you can call. Derek is about 5'11". He weighs about 220 pounds. He's got green, grayish eyes and brown, short hair, and when he was last seen, he had a beard. And with over 814 square miles to roam in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, who knows where he ended up or what his plan was. Unfortunately, he didn't tell anybody, so that's always another thing. You always want to, I know I've said this before, but you always want to tell several people of your plan. It sounds like for him, he might have known that. He probably knew that, but he didn't do that on purpose, just based on the note and what he was trying to do, doing this ultimate survival trip. But obviously, no matter how experienced you are, this is a very dangerous undertaking. But my thoughts and prayers go out for Derek and his family and friends, and hopefully he can be brought home soon, one way or another. This next case happened back in June 5th of 2014. A man who we would later know to be Parr walked into the Wallacee Interpretive Center and offered $200 to the clerk if she would watch his car for him. And so obviously she thought this was a little strange. She asked him how long he would be gone, and he said, well, maybe 4 to 6 months. So she was obviously taken aback by this, but he just walked off, and apparently a few days later, some hikers were hiking along the Appalachian Trail and found a backpack lying right in the middle of the trail, almost as if it had just been purposely put there. They looked through the pack and it had tons of gear in it, including hiking boots, a sleeping bag, a GPS system, a GoPro, $3,000 in cash, and there was a wallet with a man's ID, which they later identified was this 50-year-old construction worker, Paul D. Parr. Now, after they found this, they interviewed Parr's girlfriend, and she suggested that he had been having some mental health issues, but she told him that he had been talking about taking this sabbatical, and she told him that he had withdrawn $5,000 right before he had left. So authorities began immediately putting up flyers and asking for any information about Paul's whereabouts, and over the next few days, reports began to come in of hikers that had met up with him. One, said that he was wearing completely inappropriate hiking gear, like, short khaki shorts and flip-flops. One witness claimed to have met up with him, and she said that Paul said that he was heading towards Mount Katahdin in Maine. Another hiker reported even sharing a shelter with Parr on the Appalachian Trail. So obviously authorities began searching all over the trail where Paul had supposedly been sighted. They interviewed hikers, campers, various hostels, national park employees, but he remained very elusive. In the meantime, he was sighted on June 17th in Great Smoky Mountains National Park on the Wesser Bald. And in this case, the witness claimed to have talked to Paul for several hours, and that he'd been carrying a black duffel bag and various pots and pans. And these sightings went on for months, all through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and then up along the Appalachian Trail. And Paul sort of got this almost mythical celebrity status among the hiking community because he kept being sighted and he was in good spirits and he was wearing these goofy things like flip-flops, but he seemed to be doing well. And I mean, it's still to this day unclear what happened of Paul D. Parr, or if he ever made it to his destination, or if he ever made it out. I mean, his case still remains open, and he still remains officially missing, which, I don't know, this case is just so bizarre, everything in and surrounding it, and just, again, another one of those crazy mysteries. This last case happened on June 1st of 2015 when Jenny Bennett failed to make an appointment with her movers that were going to be relocating her from Sylva, North Carolina to Vermont, where her sister Betsy lived. For 6 days, she couldn't be located she couldn't be contacted. No cell phone, no nothing. On June 8th, her abandoned car was found at the Porters Creek trailhead, and the next morning, her body was found in the creek near a remote campsite in the Greenbrier area of the park. So at first it was thought that she had planned to take one last hike along Porters Creek, an area that she was very familiar with. Apparently, she had been there before. They all thought it was very bizarre because Jenny was very familiar with the area, and this should have been like a routine hike. The area of Porters Creek where she was found is considered to be a relatively easy area in this park. I mean, there's much harder areas, and so according to authorities, even by like beginner hiker standards, this was thought to be baffling because this was an easy area and she was an experienced hiker. Initially, it also could not be determined what the cause of death was. She had been found sitting upright against a rock in shallow water, as if she just simply sat down to rest and then somehow just passed away. There was no sign of apparent serious injury or anything like that. The only thing the authorities could do was rule out being attacked by, a predator or foul play or anything like that. 3 months later, the autopsy reports finally released that determined the cause of death to be the injuries had not been life-threatening, but she ultimately died of hypothermia, which was brought on by her somehow, being partially submerged in the water, which was apparently very cold. But it's still very bizarre the way she was found. And then apparently she was also found with a toxic level of a sleep aid, something that you'd find in something like Advil PM or Tylenol PM, although it could not obviously not be determined if that was done intentionally, if she had taken it intentionally. All her friends and family were very skeptical that she would want to commit suicide. She was very well adjusted. She was very excited about moving home to be closer to her family and do future hikes up in that area. So it just really didn't make a whole lot of sense. And to this day, the details behind this one are still very unresolved. It doesn't seem to make any sense. And her whole family, her brother and sister, they all find this to be, unsolved and unsettling. I mean, details of what actually happened to her are still unclear. The Park Service obviously launched their investigation after she was found, but they still don't really know anything other than what they've told in the autopsy reports. And it's likely that we'll probably never have any real answers. I mean, the one thing that we do know is that Jenny, apparently that was her favorite place, and she died in her favorite place in this beautiful Smoky Mountains. So I guess you can look at that as one good thing. One thing that I did learn while researching this video was that according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are an abnormally high amount of suicides or people that try and commit suicide in national parks for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they're so beautiful and people want to be in their favorite place. I mean, I don't know. But it was found that there had been over 194 in the various national parks and over 92 different unsuccessful attempts. My thoughts and prayers go out to all these families and anyone who's ever lost anybody in a national park or who's got someone that's still missing. I just hope that one day they can be brought home, that they can get the closure that the families so desperately, deserve and need. I think our national parks are beautiful and they can offer great adventure and a great experience, but I just think that it's always very important to plan correctly. And maybe if you haven't been there before, go with a group of friends, bring a satellite device. It's just always good to have a plan and tell several people of your plan. Let them know where you're going and what your timing is going to be. And stay safe out there, everyone. I want to thank everybody for watching as always. And again, please be respectful in the comments if you choose to leave them. A special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music. And I will see everyone in the next one. Take care. Alright guys, thanks for sticking with me till the end. I know I didn't cover some of the very common cases, but I just figured they're like the Dennis Martin cases like that have been covered so much that if you want me to do a separate video on them, I can. Also, I was thinking about another merch idea, not only the survival kit, which I think I'm going to do, but maybe a cozy fleece blanket. I'm trying to get pricing on it, but if that's something that you guys might be interested in, I saw some designs and came up with it, and they look really nice, and it wouldn't be crazy expensive, plus it would be something that you could use for a long time. So